The officer had his hand on his gun before the man even stepped out of the vehicle. In the carpool lane of one of Virginia's most prestigious private schools, in front of 200 parents, teachers, and children, Officer Derek Scully decided that this particular man, this well-dressed, calm, and patient man who had done absolutely nothing wrong, seemed to be an outsider. What happened in the next 11 minutes would be filmed on 17 different cell phones, broadcast on every major network before morning, and cost the police department $35.7 million. But the real twist? No one knew who Raymond Hollet really was. However, October 14th began like most Tuesdays at Westbrook Academy in Fairfax County, Virginia, with the gentle choreography of wealth and routine. Westbrook was the kind of school parents fought for. They didn't fight like most people do, with arguments and desperation, but like the powerful fight with donation checks, board appointments, and polite legal threats. The campus sprawled over 42 acres of immaculately manicured grounds off Old Dominion Drive, a place where tuition was $38,000 a year, and the parking lot resembled a luxury car dealership that had spontaneously relocated to the suburbs of Washington, D.C. By 3:15 p.m., the rideshare lane was a slow-moving river of Mercedes SUVs, Range Rovers, and an understated, elegant black Chevrolet Suburban. Government plates, no chrome, no ostentation, just clean and purposeful. The kind of vehicle you'd recognize instantly if you knew anything about cars, the kind that belonged to someone who didn't need to advertise. Raymond Hollet had been trying to make this pickup for weeks. His calendar was the kind of document national security analysts consulted. It had slots marked classified, briefing, joint chiefs of staff, and Senate oversight. His assistant, a meticulous woman named Carol Briggs, who had worked for 3 FBI directors over the course of her career, had color-coded his schedule into 7 different categories: red for critic, blue for congressional, green for personal. The 3:30 p.m. pickup at Westbrook Academy had been green, personal, for 11 consecutive Tuesdays. He had missed 10 of them. His daughter, Brianna, was 9 years old. She was in 4th grade. She loved horses, macaroni art, and the animated movie Moana, which she had seen 23 times by her own careful count. She had her father's eyes, dark, steady, watchful, and her mother's laugh, which came suddenly and filled entire rooms. Brianna had been asking, with that quiet, persistent way children have of asking for things they've stopped expecting, when Daddy would come to pick her up again. Today was the day. Raymond had told Carol to hold everything back after 2 p.m. He'd told his security detail he'd be driving the Suburban alone, a request they hated that went against protocol and that they ultimately couldn't refuse because he was, in fact, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He outranked protocol. He pulled into the Westbrook rideshare lane at 3:18 p.m., 12th in line, and sat there with the quiet satisfaction of a man who, for once, was exactly where he wanted to be. His tie was loosened. The radio was playing softly. Sardai, Ordinary Love. He was wearing a charcoal suit that had been custom-made in 2019, and it still fit perfectly because despite everything, Raymond Hollet had discipline in his bones. He was 53 years old, 6'2", broad-shouldered, and completely, utterly, and dangerously calm. This was important later. The calmness. People would describe it in 100 different ways in 100 different stories. He was so still. He wasn't moving. His hands were on the wheel. The calmness wasn't an act. It wasn't obedience. It was simply who Raymond Hollet was. A man who had spent 31 years in federal law enforcement and had learned around his 4th year that the most dangerous thing a black man in America could be in a confrontation with police was anything but motionless. He was still, and yet it didn't matter. Officer Derek Scully had been assigned to the Westbrook Academy rideshare lane for 3 weeks. It wasn't a glamorous assignment. The Fairfax County Sheriff's Office had agreed to provide afternoon traffic coordination after a minor collision in September involving two fathers who were both lawyers and had simultaneously threatened lawsuits. The principal, Patricia Gaines, had called the station. The precinct had sent Scully. Scully was 27. He'd been on the force for 14 months. He wasn't a bad person in the way the worst people are. He didn't wake up with malice. He didn't plan his day around cruelty, but he carried something that was perhaps more dangerous than malice: unexamined certainty. He was sure of how things looked, sure of who belonged where, sure in a way he'd never been asked to interrogate about which faces belonged in rideshare lanes like this one and which didn't. He saw Raymond Suburban. He noticed the government plates, but didn't think much of them. Lots of government workers in Fairfax, Pentagon contractors, low-level staff. The license plates meant nothing specific to him. He saw Raymond, and something shifted in his posture, something small, something he would later insist was professional instinct, and those body language experts hired by the plaintiff's lawyers would spend 40 minutes dissecting it in a Virginia courtroom. His hand moved toward his belt. Not quite. Just close. Closed, like a reflex moves before the conscious mind registers. He walked toward the Suburban. "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle." Raymond heard the words and processed them with the particular weariness of a man who had lived inside his own skin for 53 years. He glanced in the side mirror. He saw the uniform. He made a quick, experienced assessment: the tense posture, the hand near the belt, the distinct flavor of nervous authority that, over the course of 3 decades, he had learned to handle with exquisite care. He rolled down the window instead, slowly, deliberately. "Good afternoon, officer," he said. His voice was measured. Not friendly, not hostile, professional. "Is there a problem?" "Sir, I asked you to exit the vehicle." Scully had approached the driver's side window. His partner, Officer Todd Weaver, 24 years and 6 months on the job, had appeared on the passenger side. Neither of them knew exactly why. That's just how it went sometimes. One moved and the other followed, the choreography of authority that no one had quite written, but that everyone seemed to know. "I'm in the ride-sharing lane," Raymond said. "I'm picking up my daughter." "Whose daughter?" The question landed in the afternoon air with a certain weight. Whose daughter? Not which student. Not what's her name. Whose? As if the question of ownership were the most natural, clarifying question in the world. Raymond looked at Scully for a moment. 3 seconds, maybe 4. In those seconds, 17 parents watched from their own vehicles. A teacher's aide named Janet Prescott, who was standing at the door of the ride-sharing lane with a clipboard, had stopped ticking off names. 2 fourth-grade students who had just left the building stood very still, the way children freeze when adult situations suddenly feel overwhelming. "My daughter," Raymond said, "Brianna Holay, 4th grade." "Does she have ID?" "Officer, do you ask every parent in this line for ID?" It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question, posed with the precision of a man who had spent 31 years separating the relevant from the irrelevant. But Scully either heard something in her or constructed something, and his hand moved to his belt now. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle now." "On what grounds?" "Sir, I'm asking you a specific question." Raymond's voice hadn't risen, not even half a tone. "On what legal basis are you asking me to get out of my vehicle? I'm in a legal rideshare lane. I haven't committed any traffic violations. I haven't been aggressive. I've identified myself by name and stated my purpose. So I ask you, on what basis?" This was the moment that trial lawyers would later agree. A more experienced officer would have stopped, taken a deep breath, perhaps stepped back and asked the supervisor and recognized the question for what it was, not obstruction, but a legitimate inquiry from someone who clearly knew their rights. Scully wasn't a more experienced officer. "Out of the vehicle! Last warning!" Raymond Hollet opened the door. He got out slowly, his hands visible, his suit jacket falling neatly around his shoulders, his tie loosened but still in place, and stood beside his Suburban in the afternoon sun at 3:21 as Weaver turned around and two other officers who had apparently been nearby pulled up behind the Suburban in response to a radio call that no one outside could hear. 4 officers, a black man in a tailored suit standing next to a Suburban with government plates in a school bus share lane. The handcuffs were put on at 3:24. "You're being detained for suspicious behavior and lack of cooperation," Scully said. Raymond said nothing. His hands were behind his back. He was watching the school entrance. Somewhere inside, Brianna was waiting. He was thinking about that. Only that. And he kept his face completely neutral because he understood with a clarity that went right to his core that his composure at that moment wasn't just personal, it was survival. What no one, not Scully, not Weaver, not the 2 backup officers, had done yet was check the license plates. Janet Prescott had. She had pulled out her phone at 3:22, photographed the rear license plate, and within 40 seconds had checked the DMV record because her brother-in-law worked at the Virginia DMV and had once shown her how to use the public records portal. The record came up: United States Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, vehicle assigned to the principal's office. Janet stood very still for a moment. Then she went inside and called for Principal Patricia Gaines. Patricia Gaines had been the principal of Westbrook Academy for 11 years. She was 61, white-haired, short in stature, and possessed a kind of institutional authority that had calcified over decades into something almost impenetrable. She had handled board members, donors, divorcing parents, arguments over pickup times, and one very memorable incident involving a sitting U.S. senator and an unpaid auction paddle. She had handled it all with a combination of impeccable manners and absolute zero tolerance for nonsense. She walked through the front gate of Westbrook Academy at 3:26 and surveyed the scene in the shuttle lane. 4 police officers, a man in handcuffs, 17 stopped vehicles, and what appeared to be at least a dozen cell phone cameras. She walked straight up to Officer Scully. "Officer, what appears to be the problem here?" "Mom, this is a police matter." "Please step aside. I'm the principal of this school, and this is my bus lane. Who is this man?" "He claims to be a parent." "He is a parent." Patricia had pulled out her phone. She scrolled, found the log, and showed it. Brianna Hollet, 4th grade, parent listed as Raymond Hollet, emergency contact, authorized pickup, has been on our contact sheet since September of last year. She looked at Scully the same way she had looked at 1,000 children who had done something inexplicable. "He's exactly where he's supposed to be." Scully's jaw moved. "We had concerns." "Concerns about what?" Patricia's voice was still perfectly gentle. This was perhaps the most terrifying version of her. "Please be specific." Scully couldn't be specific, not in a way that sounded like anything other than what it was. Patricia turned to Raymond. She glanced at the handcuffs. She looked back at Scully with an expression that some members of the Westbrook board had privately likened to the moment before a controlled explosion. "Please take those off immediately," she said. "Ma'am, we're still—" "I'm going to get this man's daughter," Patricia said. "And when I get back, I expect those handcuffs to be gone, or I'll personally call the police chief, the county executive, and my attorney, in that order, while I'm standing right here." She paused. "I type very fast." She turned and went back inside. Inside, she found Brianna Holley sitting in the front office. The little girl had been waiting since 3:15. She had her backpack slung over both shoulders, the posture of a child who is ready, who has been ready, who is determined not to be the last one out the door on the day Daddy was due. "Brianna, sweetheart," Patricia said in a voice she reserved for moments that demanded extraordinary gentleness. "Your daddy's outside, but there's been a slight mix-up. Can you come with me?" Brianna looked at her with those dark, steady eyes. "Is Daddy okay?" Patricia kept her face perfectly composed. "He's perfectly fine. Let's go." Patricia returned through the front door at 3:29 with Brianna's hand in hers. The handcuffs were still on. Later, in statements, Scully would say he was waiting for authorization from a supervisor. The supervisor would say he hadn't been called. Weaver would say he thought Scully had made the decision. What is documented is that at 3:29 p.m., Raymond Holley was still standing next to his Suburban with his hands cuffed behind his back when his 9-year-old daughter came out of the school building and saw him. What Brianna did wasn't cry. That came later. What she did was stop walking. Patricia felt the small hand in hers go absolutely rigid, and then Brianna said in a voice that was barely a whisper, but that somehow carried across the bus lane, "Quiet. Dad." Raymond turned his head. He saw her, and for the first time in 11 minutes, something shifted in his face. Not a breakdown, not a rupture, but a crack, a hairline fracture through 31 years of professional composure. Because this was his little girl looking at him in handcuffs in the school parking lot, and there was nothing, no training, no discipline, no rank that could make that not hurt. "Hey, Bree," he said, firm, gentle. "It's okay. Stay with Miss Gaines." 6 cell phone cameras captured this exchange. 3 of them were positioned at angles that captured both Raymond's and Brianna's faces. One of them, belonging to a mother named Carolyn Ashworth, who had once worked in media and understood exactly what she was seeing, was already being uploaded to Twitter at 3:30 p.m. The tweet read, "Black man handcuffed in front of his daughter at Westbrook Academy School pickup. 4 cops. Just trying to pick up his kid. Shaking. Hashtag Fairfax County PD. Hashtag Westbrook Academy. Hashtag Fairfax County." Carolyn had 4,200 followers. By 4 p.m., the tweet had 47,000 likes. By 5:30 p.m., it had 310,000 retweets and was the #1 trending topic in the United States. At 6 p.m., Stephanie Kowalski of Channel 7 News was live outside Westbrook Academy with a 45-second clip, 3 phone videos edited together, and a caption that read, "Man handcuffed at school pickup, identity unknown." The identity was still unknown because Raymond hadn't told the officers who he was. Not because he was hiding it, but because he was Raymond Holley. And Raymond Holley didn't believe a man's dignity should be conditional on his job title. He had given them his name. That should have been enough. It was the FBI's assistant director who made the identity public, and he did so not through a statement, but through a phone call. Frank Castellano had been monitoring his phone with growing alarm since 3:45, when his own assistant had forwarded him the Twitter thread. Frank was 58 years old, Italian-American, a 24-year veteran of the agency, and had one non-negotiable priority in his professional life: protecting the director. He called Raymond at 3:47. Raymond, who had been released from the handcuffs at 3:34, 10 minutes after Brianna saw him, after Patricia Gaines pulled out her phone and began dialing with theatrical precision, answered on the second ring. "I'm fine," Raymond said before Frank could say anything. "Rye, he's everywhere." "I know." The secretary called the Attorney General. "Frank?" "Yes, I'm taking my daughter for ice cream. I'll be in the office at 7. She hung up. Frank Castellano sat in his office on the 5th floor of the Hoover Building and stared at his phone for a long moment. Then he opened his laptop and sent a single email to the FBI's Public Affairs Office, the Justice Department's communications team, and the U.S. Attorney General's personal phone. The subject line read, "The man in the video is Director Holloway." The internet didn't sleep that night. By 8 p.m., 6 different video compilations had been created, edited, and posted. The most viral video, assembled by a 22-year-old content creator in Atlanta named Darius Okafor, who had 1.4 million YouTube subscribers, was 4 minutes and 47 seconds long and had been viewed 9 million times by midnight. Darius had done something precise and devastating. He had overlaid the audio of Scully's commands over slow-motion footage of Brianna's face when she saw her father. He hadn't added music. He didn't need to. The comments section had 340,000 comments by 1 a.m. Most were variations of the same sentiment. Some were angrier, others were heartbroken. A small number defended the officers, and these were noted, captured on screen, and shared as exhibits in a parallel conversation that already had several spirals of depth. But what made the national conversation explode, what took it from viral outrage to a historic moment, was the revelation of the man's identity. At 9:14, ABC News confirmed it. At 9:15, NBC confirmed it. By 9:16, every major network had it. The man in the video, the handcuffed man standing next to a government Suburban watching his daughter leave school, was Raymond Holloway, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the United States, a man who commanded 35,000 agents and staff in 56 field offices, a man who reported weekly to the President of the United States, a man who, throughout his career, had arrested people, directed operations, testified before Congress, and been in more rooms of power than most Americans could name. He had been handcuffed for picking up his daughter. The White House issued a statement at 9:45 a.m. It was careful, measured, and used the word disturbing twice. The Attorney General called the FBI director, which, as everyone noted, was a somewhat unprecedented address for that call, at 9:52 a.m. to personally express his concern. At 10 p.m., Fairfax County Sheriff Ronald Matz held a press conference, standing in front of a microphone with the distinct expression of a man who had eaten something deeply unpleasant and was trying to appear composed. "We take all incidents of this nature seriously," Chief Matz said. "Officer Scully has been placed on administrative leave pending a full internal review. We want to extend our—" A reporter named Greg Patton from the Washington Post interrupted. "Chief Matz, is it your department's policy to ask parents for ID in the bus lane?" "No, it isn't." "Was Officer Scully following policy when he asked Principal Holloway for ID? Was he following policy when he used handcuffs?" Chief Matz looked at the podium as if he could offer a ransom. He didn't. By midnight, Scully's social media accounts had been located, archived, and were being analyzed by approximately 40,000 people simultaneously. What they found wasn't a monster. It was something more mundane and perhaps more troubling. The ordinary life of a young man, his usual opinions, his blind spots, and a 2019 tweet that used the phrase "profiling gets results" to defend himself against a controversy unrelated to Fairfax County, but which said everything necessary about the lens through which Officer Derek Scully viewed the world. The tweet had 7 likes when it was posted. By 1 a.m., it had accumulated 2.8 million views. At 2 a.m., Scully's mother called him and cried for 45 minutes. At 3 a.m., Scully sat in his apartment in Burke, Virginia, with the curtains drawn and his phone on the floor, and thought for the first time, slowly and uncomfortably in the dark, about the question the man in the suit had asked him. On what grounds? He didn't have a good answer. He didn't have one in the carpool lane either. He simply hadn't known then. This is where the story takes a turn. Because while the Internet Process Director Holley, the viral moment, the White House statement, and Chief Mather's press conference, something else was happening in the background, something that almost no one grasped until a researcher named Alison Perez, who wrote a legal accountability newsletter called The Fourth Amendment Review, published an in-depth analysis at 11 p.m. that began to spread through legal and law enforcement circles like wildfire. Allison had consulted the internal communications log of the Fairfax County Police Department's Traffic Coordination Program. It was a public record. Technically, most people didn't know to look for it. She had been covering the procedures of municipal police departments for 4 years, and she knew exactly which FOIA requests to file and which employees to call. What he found was this. Officer Scully hadn't been randomly assigned to Westbrook Academy. He had requested the post. He had requested the Westbrook shared lane details 3 days after another officer, a black officer named Sergeant Dennis Crawford, had initially been assigned. Scully had submitted a shift preference form, which was routine, but he had also emailed his shift supervisor citing familiarity with the neighborhood and community relations goals. His supervisor, Lieutenant Gary Folsom, had approved the change without much fanfare. Sergeant Crawford had been curious about the reassignment at the time, but hadn't pressed the issue. He was professional in that way. She had noted it down, filed it, and moved on. Alison Perez had also consulted something else, the carpool lane log from the 3 weeks Scully was stationed at Westbrook. In those 3 weeks, he had documented 4 checks of suspicious individuals. She cross-referenced the descriptions. 3 of the 4 were black or Hispanic. The 4th was a white man in a pickup truck who, according to the notes, had been verbally aggressive and subsequently released. 3 of the 4 suspicious individuals had been parents with children at Westbrook Academy. The pattern wasn't an anomaly. It was frequent. Then came the most profound twist, the one no one saw coming. Allison, while reviewing Scully's record, found something that had been partially redacted in an older file. She submitted an expedited FOIA request for the full document. It arrived at 8 a.m. the following day. Derek Scully had been involved in a previous incident. 8 months earlier, at a different location in Fairfax County, he had stopped a man named Harold Winston, a 50-year-old black contractor, for loitering outside a house in a neighborhood where Winston had a signed contract to perform renovation work. Winston had complained. The complaint had been reviewed internally. The investigating officer exercised due caution. No action was taken. Harold Winston didn't own a Suburban with government license plates. Harold Winston wasn't the director of the FBI. Harold Winston's complaint filled 7 paragraphs in a file that went nowhere. Alison Perez published The Winston Connection at 9 a.m. The post was shared 200,000 times in 2 hours. Harold Winston gave his first interview sitting at his kitchen table in Woodbridge, Virginia, his signed renewal contract visible on the table in front of him. It was to the Washington Post at 11 a.m. He was calm, deliberate, and precise in every detail. "I told them who I was," Harold said. "I showed them the contract. They said it still seemed suspicious. I asked, 'Suspicious of what exactly?' They didn't answer. They just told me to leave." He paused. "Nobody put me on the news. Nobody made a story out of it. I just went home and tried to finish the job." He looked into the camera. The same thing happened to that man, except he was the director of the FBI, and now everyone's upset. Harold Winston had 14 Twitter followers before that morning. He had 340,000 by evening. The lawsuit was filed on October 21st, a week after the incident. Raymond Holley didn't file it himself. He had been careful about that, precise in his public statements, measured in his appearances, reluctant to use his position as a weapon when a private citizen in the same situation wouldn't have had access to those same weapons. What he said in his only public statement, offered in a 2-minute press appearance with Brianna by his side, was this: "I'm the director of the FBI. I shouldn't have been treated like this. But here's what I need every person watching this to understand. Harold Winston is a Woodbridge contractor. He was treated the same way. So was the man before him, and the man before that one, and the thousands of men whose names you'll never know because they didn't have government badges or a viral video." My daughter asked me that night if I was okay. I said yes. What I should have told her is that I will make sure this never happens to her or anyone who looks like her or me. That's what I intend to do. He stepped away from the microphone. The lawsuit was filed by a coalition. Harold Winston, represented by civil rights attorney Miriam Okonkwo of the Washington firm Okonkwo and Chase. Two of the other three parents who had been subjected to Scully's checks in the carpool lane, Terrence Beaumont and a woman named Rosa Delgado, joined the lawsuit. Raymond Holley, after consulting with the Justice Department's Ethics Office, filed a formal statement supporting the plaintiffs but did not join as a nominal plaintiff, citing his position. His statement was 47 pages long. It was, according to legal observers, the most accurate written eyewitness account they had ever seen of one law enforcement officer testifying against another. Miriam Okonkwo read the first 3 pages in her office, then sat silently for a moment before calling her paralegal and simply saying, "We're going to win this." The lawsuit named Officer Derek Scully, Lieutenant Gary Folsom, Chief Ronald Matz, and Fairfax County. It alleged civil rights violations under Section 1983 of the United States Code, racial discrimination, false imprisonment, and a systemic pattern of discriminatory enforcement. The discovery process was where things began to unravel for the defense with the terrible momentum of a building whose foundation has cracked. Scully's text messages were cited. Among them was a message sent to Officer Todd Weaver on the morning of October 14th, 5 hours before the Holley incident, in which Scully wrote, "Working school pickup again. These Westbrook parents need to calm down with their attitude." Weaver had replied, "Haha. Did anyone give you trouble?" Scully, "Not yet. But there are always some who think they can park wherever they want. Then, 20 minutes later, also, the guy who pulls up in a nice car, but something's always a little off." The jury, upon seeing this exchange, remained silent for a long time. Folsom's emailed approval of the change of assignment was admitted as evidence. A use-of-force expert named Dr. Leonard Caputo, retired from the NYPD after 22 years, testified for 3 hours about departmental standards for the use of handcuffs and the specific circumstances under which the use of physical restraint was appropriate in a shared line. His conclusion, delivered with the flat precision of a man who had seen too much to be dishonest, was, "There is no circumstance described in Fairfax County's own policy manual that authorizes this detention. None." Chief Mathers was cross-examined. It lasted 6 hours. Afterward, his attorney declined to comment. The county insurer requested a conciliation conference 2 weeks after the discovery. Conciliation was reached on March 3rd of the following year. 4 months and 17 days after the incident, the county agreed to pay $35.7 million to be distributed among the 4 plaintiffs, their legal fees, and a newly established community oversight fund. Scully was fired. Folsom was demoted. Chief Mathers took early retirement, which his department described as voluntary. The oversight fund was named at the suggestion of Harold Winston after no one famous. It was named after his grandmother. This is the hardest part of the story to tell simply. Derek Scully sat across from a journalist named Peter Brangan in a restaurant in Springfield, Virginia, the following April, after the settlement, after the firing, after everything. And he wasn't the monster the internet had decided he was. And he wasn't innocent. And he wasn't redeemed. And he wasn't broken. He was 27 years old, and he was grappling with what he had done in a visibly uncomfortable and still incomplete way. He had started seeing a therapist in November. Her name was Dr. Gloria Fitch. She had recommended a specific kind of work: implicit bias training, anti-racist education, and most importantly, a process she called the archaeology of accountability. Excavating through the assumptions she had built up so slowly and so long ago that she hadn't known they were there until something enormous shattered them. "I keep thinking about what she asked me," Scully told Brangen. Her coffee was untouched. "On what grounds? And I still don't have a good answer, and every time I try to construct one, it falls apart." She paused. "Because the answer is, I saw it. And I saw something that made me uncomfortable, and I told myself it was instinct. But it wasn't. It was just what I'd always been taught to see. And I never asked who taught me, or why, or if they were right." He looked out the window. They weren't right. This was not absolution. Miriam Okonkwo, when Brangen asked her about Scully's interview, said, "What he describes is the bare minimum of honest reflection. It's a starting point, not an end point. My clients can't move on because he's in therapy." Terrence Beaumont had nightmares for 3 months. Rosa Delgado's son, who was in the car, has anxiety attacks. Brianna Holay is 9 years old and saw her father in handcuffs. Her voice was even and calm. "It's good for Derek Scully that he's in therapy. The work he has to do won't be finished for a long time." Harold Winston was not interviewed for Brangen's article. His publicist, he had a publicist now, something that still made Harold laugh with the specific bewilderment of a man whose life had been rearranged by accident, said he was focused on a project. He was working with a nonprofit called the Ordinary Citizens Legal Defense Fund, which he had co-founded with 2 of the other victims of the Scully incident to provide legal representation to people who filed police complaint forms that went nowhere. "The complaint I filed," Harold said in a previous interview, "went into a folder. The folder went into a filing cabinet. The filing cabinet is probably still there. I want to make sure the next Harold Winston doesn't just go home and try to finish the job." The fund, at the time of publication, had handled 31 cases in Northern Virginia. 19 of them had resulted in formal sanctions against agents. 4 had resulted in policy changes. None of them had involved the FBI director. All of them had involved someone equally deserving of justice. He took her for ice cream that night to a place in McLean called the Scoop Box, which had been her favorite since she was 5 because they made custom blends, and the woman behind the counter, whose name was Patty, always gave Brianna extra sprinkles and called her Miss B. They sat at a table by the window. Brianna had chocolate with gummy bears and crushed Oreo cookies. Raymond had plain vanilla because he always had plain vanilla, and Brianna always teased him about it. "Dad," she said, "why did the police do that?" Raymond put down his spoon. He looked at his 9-year-old daughter, his eyes serious, Oreo crumbs on his chin, and made the decision parents make in life-changing moments. He decided to tell the truth, not the whole truth. She was 9, but enough. Because sometimes, he said, people make assumptions about someone based on how they look, and sometimes those assumptions lead them to do things they shouldn't. "Because you're black?" He paused. "Yes." Brianna considered it. She turned her ice cream upside down. "But you're the director of the FBI." "I know. So they should have known, Bri." He leaned forward slightly. "They should have known because I told them my name. Because of that. Not because of my job. Just because I told them who I was and I wasn't doing anything wrong. That should have been enough." She looked at him. "But it wasn't." "No," he said. "It wasn't. And that's what we're going to keep working on." He was silent for a moment. "Are you sad?" He thought about the honest answer. "A little," he said. "But mostly I'm okay." He leaned down and wiped the crumb from her chin because I have to pick you up. She smiled, her mother's smile, sudden and room-filling. And for a moment it made everything, the handcuffs, the cameras, the calls, the mediation, the whole enormous machinery of consequence seem very far away. They finished their ice cream. He drove her home. Denise Hollet was waiting for them at the door. She'd been watching the news for 2 hours and texting Raymond with the careful, controlled demeanor of a woman who wore the effort of composure as armor. When he came in with Brianna, Denise looked at him for a moment. Just looked at him. The way people look when they've been afraid, and the fear is only now being released. And then she hugged him. That was the most honest thing that happened that day. Brianna went upstairs to do her homework. Raymond and Denise stood in the front hall for a long time. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Better now," he said. $35.7 million. Read it quickly, and it seems like justice. Let it sink in. Really sink in. Turn it over. Hold it up to the light, and it becomes something more complicated. Something that resists easy interpretation. Something that is simultaneously more than Harold Winston ever hoped for and less than Brianna Hollet deserves. Numbers have a way of doing that. They close arguments while leaving wounds open. Let's go over the numbers carefully because they tell the story the headlines didn't have room for. Terrence Beaumont received a $2 million severance package. He's a 41-year-old project manager who had been picking up his daughter from Westbrook for 2 years without incident until Scully's third week on the job when he was asked to get out of his Lexus and explain why he was in the carpool lane. He had explained everything calmly and in detail. He had shown his ID, displayed his daughter's school record on his phone, and waited while Scully radioed someone who apparently confirmed that yes, this man's son did attend this school. Terrence was never handcuffed, but he sat in his car for 19 minutes while other parents milled around him, and his daughter stood on the sidewalk watching. And something happened in those 19 minutes that a $2 million settlement can't fully address. He still jumps when he sees a police car in a parking lot. Not a dramatic start. Not something you'd notice if you weren't looking for it. A small involuntary stiffness in his shoulders, a half-second recalibration, a tax his body pays every time. He described it in a podcast interview with host Dana Whitfield, who runs a long-form civil rights program called Reckoning Room. "It's not exactly fear," Terrence said. "It's just awareness, permanent, heightened awareness. And I hate that I was given that because I didn't ask for it and I can't pay it back." He used most of the settlement to pay off his mortgage and set up college funds for his 3 children. He said, when asked if the money helped, that it helped with the mortgage. It hasn't touched the shoulders. Rosa Delgado received an $8 million settlement. She was in the shared lane one Wednesday afternoon in early October, 12 days before the Hollet incident, when Scully approached her window and asked, in the distinctive tone of someone who had already made up their mind, if she was in the right place. Her son Marco was 7 years old and sitting in the booster seat right behind her. He heard everything. He saw everything. Afterward, he asked why the police were mean to Mommy. Rosa didn't know how to answer that, and she still doesn't, and she's had professional help trying to figure it out. Marco is in 2nd grade now. His therapist describes him as making progress, which is one of those clinical phrases that contain enormous amounts of pain within very few words. He's afraid of undefined authority figures. Sometimes he cries when he sees a police car on television. He's 7 years old and working on it, and it cost $1.8 million to legally establish that he shouldn't have had to start working on it at all. Harold Winston received $4.2 million, reflecting both the Westbrook encounter and the earlier incident Allison Perez had brought to light. The renovation work, the signed contract on the table, the 22 minutes of explaining himself to an officer who had already made up his mind. Harold donated $1 million to the Ordinary Citizens Legal Defense Fund immediately after receiving it, before the check had even fully cleared. He framed the donation confirmation and hung it above the fireplace. His wife, Patricia, said it was the most Harold thing she'd ever done. He said she wasn't wrong, and he had no regrets and would do it again tomorrow. The remaining $28.5 million went toward legal fees, court costs, administrative expenses, and the Community Oversight Fund, named after Harold's grandmother, Eunice May Winston, who had grown up in rural Georgia, and whom Harold said would have had precisely zero patience for all of this, and would have been in that shared lane with a notepad before anyone even thought of calling a lawyer. Now here's what the $35.7 million didn't do. It didn't undo 11 minutes of a 9-year-old girl watching her father in handcuffs. It didn't retrieve Harold Winston's original complaint from the county file, where it had been filed, reviewed, closed, and forgotten. That document still exists, still technically marked "no action required," a silent monument to how these things usually end. It didn't restore Rosa Delgado's son's carefree relationship with police officers, which he had one Tuesday afternoon in early October and didn't have by Tuesday night. It didn't restore Terence Beaumont's version of himself, who used to merge effortlessly into traffic behind a police car without a second thought. What money did, what it does in cases like this, when the system works as it rarely does, is create a record, an inescapable, permanent, legally certified, and publicly accessible record that states with the full weight of institutional authority, this happened, it was wrong, these people were harmed, and these are the consequences. The record cannot be unfiled. It cannot be closed with a 2-sentence conclusion. It exists. It goes in a different kind of binder, the kind lawyers cite, the kind journalists reference, the kind of document prospective plaintiffs hand to their lawyers when they sit across from them and ask, "Has this happened before?" It has. The record now confirms it with associated monetary figures. Records are important. They aren't enough. They don't heal. They don't restore. But they are permanent in a way that a complaint filed away in a drawer isn't. And permanence has its own power. Allison Perez's newsletter, The Fourth Amendment Review, had 4,200 subscribers the morning she published her in-depth investigation into Scully's stop pattern. By spring, that number had climbed to 290,000. She has brought on 2 additional researchers and is currently tracking similar stop patterns in carpool lanes and public spaces in 11 other jurisdictions across Virginia, Maryland, and Georgia. She is building a database. She's cross-referencing complaint records, public information requests, and settlements. She hasn't slept 8 hours straight since October, and she considers it a fair trade, although she recently bought a better coffee maker, which her husband Greg described as the most encouraging sign he'd seen in months. The database isn't complete yet. It won't be for a long time. That's precisely the goal. One Tuesday in January, 3 months after the settlement, Director Patricia Gaines received a letter. It was handwritten on plain white paper in neat block letters. It was from a woman in Manassas, Virginia, named Beverly Croft. Beverly's son, Nathan, had been detained in a supermarket parking lot the previous summer for loitering suspiciously. He was waiting for his mother, who was inside buying bread. Nathan was 16 years old. He was detained for 22 minutes, no charges, no incident report, no viral video. Beverly had filed a complaint. It had ended up in a file. After the news report about the incident aired, Beverly found Allison Perez's newsletter. Then she found Miriam Okonkwo's law firm. Next, she filed a public records request, just as Allison had explained in an article about how ordinary people could track public records. The public records request brought to light 3 similar incidents involving the same officer. Beverly's case was now open. She had written to Patricia Gaines because Patricia had been quoted in the coverage of the incident, stating that she planned to implement a new staff training protocol on community interactions with law enforcement on school grounds. Beverly wanted to know if Westbrook Academy would consider hosting a public session open to all parents in Fairfax County, not just Westbrook parents, about knowing their rights in encounters with the police. Patricia responded in less than 24 hours. She said yes. The session was held on February 8th. It was moderated by Miriam Okonkwo. 300 people attended. Harold Winston sat in the second row. Terence Beaumont sat next to him. A 16-year-old named Nathan Croft sat in the front row with his mother, Beverly, holding a notepad on which he meticulously took notes for the entire 2.5 hours. Raymond Hollet was not present. He was in Washington. His office confirmed this when consulted at a meeting with senior management regarding a new departmental policy on interactions with minority communities during federal operations. Brianna was at home doing 4th grade homework. That week she had written a story for class about what she wanted to be when she grew up. Her teacher, a woman named Miss Joanna Park, had read it twice before returning it to her. The story read, "When I grow up, I want to be someone who makes things fair, not just for people with government cars, but for everyone." Miss Park had written across the top in red pen, "Excellent work, Brianna. It's exactly the right idea. Brianna got top marks." She showed it to her father that evening. He read it standing in the kitchen, still in his work clothes, and was silent for a moment. That way, he sometimes was silent, that particular stillness that meant something had sunk in. Then he folded the paper along its original crease very carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. The same pocket where every morning he kept a photograph of Brianna at 4 years old, sitting on his shoulders on the National Mall, laughing at something just out of frame. Some things are kept close. Some things are kept because they remind you why the work matters. Raymond Hollet drove to the Hoover Building at 7 o'clock the next morning. He took the elevator to the 5th floor. He walked past the photographs of all the FBI directors who had preceded him. He paused, as he sometimes did, at the oldest ones, the black and white faces, the formal poses, the long, unbroken line of men who had held the position and who, at one time or another, had all believed they were on the right side of something. He thought about what it truly meant to be on the right side. Then he got to work. This story is real in every way that matters. The names have been changed. The events are a composite, but the dynamic, a black man doing something ordinary and being treated like a suspect, a complaint filed and forgotten, a reckoning that only comes when someone powerful enough is in the frame, is real. This isn't fiction. This happens in grocery stores, parking lots, parks, and school bus lanes every day. Harold Winston doesn't go viral. Nathan Croft doesn't trend. The complaint goes in the folder. The folder goes in the filing cabinet. What you do right now matters. If this story made you feel anything, anger, recognition, determination, turn that feeling into action. Like it so it reaches the person who needs to hear it. Share it because Beverly Croft figured out how to fight by reading a newsletter, and the next Beverly Croft is in your network right now. Subscribe because we're going to keep telling these stories, the ones that go viral and the ones that don't, until the binder and filing cabinet are empty and every Nathan, Harold, and Terence gets the same response Miriam Okonkwo promised her clients. We will win this. The ripple effect starts here. Pass it on.